Hello, everyone. Greetings to everybody who's tuned in to this session from different parts of the world. A very warm welcome to this second day and the 15th thematic session of the 4th World University Summit, hosted by the O.P. Jindal Global University. My name is PULKIT KHANNA. I am a professor of psychology and I serve as the Dean of the Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences at this university. It is my absolute pleasure today to moderate this session on a very important theme, that is recognizing and accrediting lifelong learning in higher education. I am deeply honored to be joined by my esteemed colleagues and panelists who I'm sure will contribute a lot of innovative thought, very meaningful points to make this discussion something to remember and to take away a lot from. So without much ado, I will just take a moment to briefly introduce the panelists, set the tone for the issue at hand, and thereafter take it forward from there. Joining us today is Professor Dr. NIGAM, who is the Registrar and Professor of Law at the National Law School of India University, Bengaluru. Dr. NIGAM holds a DPhil in Law from the University of Oxford, an LLM in Taxation from the New York University, and a BA LLB Honours from the National Law School of India University. Welcome, pleasure to meet you. We also have with us my colleague, Professor Dr. Mercy DEBORAH, who is a professor at the Jindal Global Law School. She also brings a lot of diverse expertise from her graduation reading in history and law from the University of Delhi, her master's in law as a student of merit scholarship from the India Law Institute, and her doctoral studies from the National Law University, Delhi. Finally, I'm also very pleased to welcome my colleague, Professor Dr. Ramachandran, who is the Vice Dean of the Jindal School of Banking and Finance. Professor Ramachandran teaches management, leadership, entrepreneurship, and emerging technologies. So, of course, I'm very cognizant that in this brief line or two, I do not really do justice to the illustrious backgrounds that each one of them represent here today. But I take the liberty of doing that in the interest of time so that we can actually save up time to talk more about the theme that we are here to discuss. That is, once again, just to remind you, recognizing and accrediting lifelong learning in higher education. Now, if we look at the world that all of us, that you and I inhabit today, I think it is very evident that it is a fast evolving world. Just a quick look around, or if we were to scan history from the past few decades, it's very evident that whether you look at environment, science, technology, society, culture, there is rapid transformation everywhere. And this evolving world then also necessitates continuous learning, adaptability. So if each of us have to ensure, be it our personal growth or professional development, I think it is imperative that we can no longer be complacent and rely on one cutoff level of education or one cutoff date that, okay, this is the date till where we need to educate ourselves, or this is the age, and that is enough to hold you and I in good stead for the rest of our lives. If we also look at the SDG 4, that is the Sustainable Development Goal 4, it also emphasizes on ensuring inclusive, equitable, quality education to promote lifelong learning. All of this conversation around us is clearly pointing at the need to integrate the business of learning and living. How learning cannot be something that is boxed away in isolation from what goes on in life outside of a typical classroom. What all of this means is that universities, which in fact each one of us represents today, universities as institutions of higher education then emerge as very important stakeholders in this conversation. They have the capacity, the wherewithal, the mandate to ensure learning, to foster innovation, to work with a lot of people. And therefore, universities become very key players and stakeholders in taking forward whatever it is that needs to be done to ensure quality lifelong education, accrediting it, making it accessible for learners from different contexts, and making sure that it goes beyond perhaps conventional ideas, but really something that is ready to meet the need of the changing times. So with those words, I am happy to now hand it over to the esteemed panelists who are here. I will request you in the order of introduction, that is Professor Nigam, Professor Mercy, and then Professor Ramachandran, if you could please share your introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Pulkit, and a very good morning to all the panelists and all the people who are in the audience. It's actually quite exciting to be here because this is a conversation that is long overdue in some ways. I think I like to begin with what the note that Pulkit ended on, which is what are universities for, in the light of the SDG 4 and in the light of their responsibilities. I think universities are for learning, but the idea of learning has changed over a period of time. It used to be learning within a certain time period at a certain early stage of a person's life. That is no longer the case. In fact, that is no longer the case for quite some time now. And so I don't think we need to really work very hard to make a case for lifelong learning or learning across various breadths of a person's life, not just when the person is young and at the beginning of his or her academic career. The requirement for that arises from the fact that the needs of any domain change dynamically over a period of time. I come from the domain of law. I'm sure it's the same for other domains as well. The needs for that, the idea that you need to be a good lawyer and the concept of a good lawyer changes quite dynamically over a period of time. It's happened in all countries. India is no exception to that. And so it's really important for us to understand from the point of view of demand, what it means to be a good lawyer. And in especially from coming from my law school, I can tell you that we have had several programs which have resulted in we reaching out to lawyers, practitioners, in-house counsel, people who are involved in law in some way or the other throughout their lives through various outreach programs. Our executive, what we call executive education program, is really a program which focuses on lifelong learning. It's a program that makes sure that whether it's environmental law, human rights, technology, commercial law, there's lifelong learning. So I'll stop here and I'll let other panelists talk, and we can perhaps come back to the other themes later. Thank you.
Over to you, Professor Mercy.
Thank you very much, Professor Khanna. And it's indeed an honor to join this session with our distinguished panelists who are vastly and uniquely experienced in different facets of the education sector. And this theme particularly leaves a lot of us as educationists and as everyday students as we have to be. This particular theme leaves us in a quandary because we have to constantly deal, every day with engaging in flexible and continuous learning, not just to keep ourselves updated, but also to, impart interesting things to our students and to keep them fairly well engaged, not just during the classroom, but also beyond, and, sort of leave them cues to go even after the classroom and look up and research. So lifelong learning process as it is not just the order of the day, but it's like a sine qua non for surviving in, let's say, a knowledge-based society that is now powered by technology. And yet we still grapple and fail to find solutions for some of the basic age-old or newly, created problems or conflicts that abound today. So here are a couple of my preliminary reflections on the theme of this particular session, as I was just, ruminating about it last evening. Firstly, if we are talking about recognizing and accrediting lifelong learning in higher education, I think we must at the outset recognize that not every subject under the sun requires accreditation by a higher education. And even subjects sometimes that we think requires some degree of formal learning can always be very well self-taught or acquired by experiential learning. And for some learners, they may just, end up assembling or deassembling a computer or, pick up skills of entrepreneurship. So not everything under the sun necessarily requires a recognition or accreditation. And of course, lifelong learning process is to a lot of us a very personal journey as well. This brings us to the second question, which is what are the modes that we're looking at, platforms for facilitating flexible and continuous learning today? In India, as is the case elsewhere also across various jurisdictions, we have both the formal as well as the informal, and of course, other modes like online and distance modes of education. And, in fact, our national education policy also recognizes the need for, having these blended learning as well as assessments. We recently had what is, last year, the UGC had rolled out the year before last, a 4-year undergraduate program, which essentially now increasingly recognizes that learning cannot be really, just as our careers can't follow a linear progression path, even learning and studying, even at an undergraduate level, can't always be linear. You do need to, everybody comes with their different skill sets and a very different mindset. And so a flexible mode of education is the need of the hour, with multiple entry and exit points, which cater to different kinds of students. And the third issue, which probably we would have to address somewhere is, or I'll leave it to the panel, is what is a suitable accreditation process? Because as I see around on social media, we have, of course, we do encourage folks to, take to lifelong learning programs. You have, online platforms such as, Coursera, Unacademy, UpGrad, offering a range of wonderful courses, some of which even I subscribed to during the pandemic. But you do see, accreditation is a difficult task because we are getting into businesses of micro-credentialing and other digital certifications, which, everybody loves to splash it around social media. But accreditation process, my question would be, is it also necessary? Because sometimes just some aspects of learning just do not deserve or merit an accreditation. And the fourth and the issue is that there are, when we're talking about recognizing and accrediting lifelong learning processes, there are also, as we see with the new modes of mass online programs, physical material and structural and design barriers that come. Of course, most of the online courses that I've also reached out, particularly during the pandemic time, where most of them are free, and I did most of them for fun. But there are also for earnest, seekers of knowledge. You also have structural barriers, such as in terms of fees, managing the expectations of individual learners. And my last point that I just wanted to drive home is, many a times the process of lifelong learning need not be recognized or accredited. It simply boils down to the joy of learning without any care of any assessment process or accreditation on the part of the learner. So how do, higher education institutions, do we also have a space for such category of learners who simply might want to tune in and join a course without any care for the accreditation process? Those are some of my preliminary reflections, and I'll be happy to hear from others too.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Professor Ram.
Thank you so much, and good morning to everyone listening in, and to the esteemed panelists. Something that Professor Nigam just mentioned around the fact that this learning and the continuous learning process is not started now. So that reminds me of a quote, probably you have heard of that. And this says, there is no end to education. It is not that you read a book, pass an examination, and finish with education. The whole of life, from the moment you're born to the moment you die, is a process of learning. Okay? This was said by Jiddu Krishnamurti, the philosopher, the spiritual leader, called as a world teacher, an author, very well quoted. So he talked about this almost 100 years back. And so did Mahatma Gandhi. He talked about live as if you were to die tomorrow, learn as you were to live forever, right? So the concept of lifelong learning is nothing new. I think that's an important aspect that one needs to understand. And what we are trying to do is systematize that process and provide some structure and meaning to that, right? The lifelong learning. So I do understand where Professor Mercy is coming from as it relates to accreditation, and I agree with you totally. The fact that people learn for various reasons, and while for pleasure, for knowledge creation, knowledge accumulation, but a lot of times this lifelong learning starts primarily driven by career prospects and upward mobility, right? So I want to talk about three things in my opening comments. Is that the aspect of learning has become a lot more pronounced in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, with the whole aspect of the gig economy coming into place. The fact that currently there are, again, by World Bank statistics, at least in the US, the gig economy accounts for 12% of the labor market. And then that generates about $1.35 trillion. I mean, this was just in 2022. Just on online gig space, there are 435 million workers. And so just by its very nature, people have to go through the process of learning, unlearning, and relearning every 5 years, right? And so this is a challenge that one needs to recognize, both on the demand side and on the supply side. So when you think about the whole aspect of the demand side is where we have to look at the business and the industry and how they are reacting to the aspects of new skill requirements. But on the supply side, we need to think about, and that's where the higher education institutions, traditional colleges and universities, but also the non-traditional forms of institutions, whether they are the industrial training institutions or vocational institutions and such, they play a huge part, and we have to talk about that as well in terms of how they are performing, especially from an Indian context, but also globally, right? And so we need to think about it from an angle of availability, access, and the quality, and then ultimately in terms of what kind of output and delivery that they provide to the business and to the industry, so that the society grows, the economy grows, and there is general enrichment across the global space. And so we need to think about both from the supply side and the demand side. And I think the aspect of how the demand is being met, we need to kind of dissect that a little more. And probably the aspect around supply side also we need to look at in terms of whether there are skills that are being provided by the higher education institutions, whether they are sufficient and valid or not, either through certifications, accreditation, and other means. So I think with that brief remarks, I would like to hand it back to you, Pulkit.
All right, thank you very much. I think between the three of you, with those introductory remarks, we have a lot of food for thought. And I am, a little worried now that we have such limited time. But I will try and make the most of everything that we can put together in the short span of time. So I will come back to you, Professor Nigam, at this point. In your introductory remarks, you did briefly touch upon it, but I'll request you to maybe dive a little deeper and share with us in some more detail about your institution specifically. What is it that is happening to engage with the wider community, to engage in lifelong learning? How is the institution, if it is committed to, accomplishing SDG 4, what are the various things that are being done? What are the future plans? If you could share that with us, please.
Sure. Yeah. So the National Law School has a very interesting history. I'm a part of it myself. I'm one of the first batches of the law school. And when we started out as an institution, we were basically a teaching institution. We wanted to, the National Law School was envisaged as an institution that would transform the way law is taught in India, as opposed to how it was taught at that point of time. And very quickly we learned as an institution that that was an inadequate mandate for us. We were focused on classroom teaching on the undergrads, and very quickly, I would say within about between 7 to 8 years of the institution's founding, we realized that would not be that's not an adequate focus for an institution of a national scale. And so we wanted to do two things. We wanted to expand legal education so that it is available, accessible to not just those 80 undergrads who used to come to law school every year, but to a wider public. And by a wider public, we meant two things. We meant people who had already graduated from law schools and who wanted to update their skills in various legal areas. So there are people who had graduated from law school who were in civil practice, who wanted to actually focus a lot of energy on developing commercial practice areas, M&As, tax, banking, insurance. We developed courses where people could do so while being at their work. Right? So we had our flagship Master of Business Law program, which continues till today, and which is actually the most popular distance education program in India. And the 2-year MBL course gives an opportunity for any lawyer, or indeed any person who has an interest in commercial law, to develop their skill and knowledge in that area. Now, and that was one, but the other one was to try and see if people who were in allied fields, not necessarily lawyers, who wanted to expand their learning, could access our courses. So our courses now have gone beyond just commercial law. As I said in my introductory remarks, we have environmental law, human rights law, medical law, intellectual property law. And what we're trying to do there, and we see a number of people who come to our courses are people who are not lawyers, but are people who are involved with the law in some way or the other in their lives. And therefore, in that kind of lifelong learning, they want to ensure that that knowledge and skill that they lack, they can obtain from an executive or from an online or a distance education course. So that was the accessibility part that you were talking about, Pulkit. But I saw that towards the end of you had another part to your question, and you were talking about SDG 4 in particular. And that's not just, as you know, that's not only about accessibility, it's also about inclusive learning. And that's a whole, that's a whole new thing that we need to also focus on. And I say it's a whole new thing because even distance education can be exclusive, can exclude people, right? And so it's important that when it comes to education and making it inclusive, that we pay conscious, deliberate attention to how to do that. We have done that. We have done that both in our undergrad program and in our online programs. Undergrad programs, we've done it through the traditional routes. We have expanded our numbers so that we can provide greater access to the disadvantaged sections of the society. We have made sure that people from both economic and social cultural backgrounds that are disadvantaged have full access now to the law school with scholarships. And that's at the undergrad level. At the postgraduate level, at the distance education or online education level, we have constantly strived to ensure that the fees we charge are reasonable, so that people who are able to, who want access to this kind of education, are able to get it and are able to access our education without a whole lot of inconvenience, both in terms of time as well as in terms of finance. I think I'll stop here and let's see how the other questions go.
Great, thank you so much. Before I move on to a slightly different area, Professor Mercy, would you like to add something to that question?
Yeah. Actually, I quite echo the sentiment, because most educational universities and, whether it's law schools or, universities which have other interdisciplinary studies, are have a checklist of things which are mandated both by the government and some subject to the resources. We do, evolve programs as we go by. So yes, I mean, at JGU also pretty much we have a similar experience with a couple of things that we do different that I, both as a faculty and, what we've heard from students, certain engagements have, really kindled our interest. So while all programs that we have at our university, and I'm sure it's the same case with many universities across India and other overseas, is that all our programs are open to learners, dehors of which age group they are from, except for, of course, professional degrees, where there would be regulatory requirements prescribing any age limit. But, there is an uptick in, learners from various age groups, who are taking to various kinds of, changing their career tracks and opting for, let's say an array of programs, let's say public policy, public health, international affairs, business management. Sometimes people cross over from, undergrad degree from law to public policy or international affairs. And of course, like a lot of universities, we also have on-campus, in addition to on-campus residential programs, we also offer off-campus non-residential programs, such as a couple of years ago, we started, seeing the demand and the mandates that also were coming. We started the first master's in law program in environmental law, energy and climate change, with a tie-up in collaboration with the WWF India to deal with, unique areas such as, analyzing alternate energy, technical knowledge in the environmental field, something that one doesn't get from, typical LLM environmental law courses. So a very well-designed course, which program in collaboration with the WWF. And the third is we also have, like most universities also have a preference for online mode of education, where we are collaborating, and some of our programs are powered by platforms, edu platforms such as UpGrad. So we have the MBA in digital finance, or a corporate finance, LLM in corporate financial law, or IP law, or technology law. But what is most important of all, and perhaps the most enjoyable part of the learning process at the university, and I'm sure a lot of colleagues across various universities would share a similar experience, is the manner in which we as universities, engage with our local communities. And I think that's one of the high points of our, initiatives. And so just to sort of give you an example, we have a Center for Historic Houses, which is, hosted in the architecture school at Jindal. And our faculty who heads it, engages with cultural heritage conservationists and takes out students and, heritage house owners to, work on preservation of historic houses. Monuments, of course, in India get their share of spotlight, but heritage historic houses seldom get any, sort of spotlight and attention in India. So it sort of makes the learning process very innovative for our students. And of course, there are, most importantly, in addition to your engagement programs that we have, outdoor programs where students go for field visits. We have an interesting, uptick in the, subscription of in-house programs for faculty and staff. Because most universities, we think that the students are the only, and they must be, students always are the first center point of attention at universities, but we forget our staff and faculty too. But I mean, there's always a yearning even among staff and faculty to, upskill themselves, reskill themselves. So an interesting assortment of, often we see at JGU, different schools offering interesting courses where faculty and including staff can sign up, such as we had, the Center for Languages, taking up, an entire semester where a lot of faculty and staff, took up certain modern Indian languages or foreign languages and could, sort of just to sort of cater to their own interests. So, I mean, overall, in a university, you need these blend of flexible learning pathways to cater to, broad range of learners and target groups. With respect to, let's say, probably if one is thinking, I mean, as a university, definitely, we are conscious of both, and all universities in general are conscious of the national imperatives as well as the international goals. But something that I think all of us keep working towards is creating multiple pathways for learning. So something like immersion programs or study abroad programs is something that we also, are pretty committed so that we, ensure that our students get a reasonable amount of, exposure abroad at overseas universities so that they're able to become global citizens. And also, we are also, as part of the SDGs, we are committed to providing scholarships, which has been steadily increasing. JGU provides almost 50% of the students admitted to various programs, scholarships under the Merit Cum Means scholarship program that we have. Of course, the scholarship varies based on the merit, but this cap has been, we've been, as a university, consciously increasing the cap to now, let's say, 60% going forward for the academic year 24-25. And that's all a part of, our institutional commitment. So there are all these blend of initiatives which, ensure that students are, mainstreamed and brought into the system, and everybody, people who really need also scholarship are provided sufficient grants to be able to get the best of education. I'll leave that there, and I'll, love to hear from Professor Ram and others.
Thank you both so much. I think this was very helpful, especially how you went into some more detail, outlined specific initiatives, specific anecdotes of things that have worked well over the years. And one of the common things, although you both were from your respective institutional, examples, sharing different stories, but one of the common things that does definitely strike a chord and stays with me is how these traditional, more conventional boundaries are being blurred. So when Professor Nigam speaks of a lot of takers for law programs being people who are actually not lawyers, but the people from different domains of the society, or when Professor Mercy, you speak about how we're really rethinking who the learner is. Does it always have to be the student, or does the teacher also become the student? And how we just keep doing role reversals, because isn't that the essence of what lifelong learning is? But on that note, please allow me to go over to Professor Ram, and I would like to just ask you to, think more about digital literacy skills. What role do they have to play in this environment? And how do all of us as universities, as stakeholders, as well as not just the universities as institutions, but also the government, what role do all of these stakeholders have to play here in this context?
The key word here is it has to be a concerted effort. Okay, it has to be a concerted effort coming from society at large, which includes the government, NGOs, educationists, learners, because these days, if you look at the generation Alpha, which is after the millennials and the Gen Zs, the Alphas are born with the phone in their hand, right? So one cannot just but avoid talking about digital age when we are in the the fourth industrial revolution, where information is the key, right? The World Economic Forum, I think last year said that there is going to be a shortage of 85 million workers with digital skills, right? Already, right now in the US, 1/3 of the working population don't have digital skills. They anticipate that there is going to be 5 times the need in Asian and Southeast Asian region. So that's a significant demand, if you will, in terms of the digital literacy part of it. And it's not that the whole magic has not been cracked, because when we talk about, so I'll give you my example. So when I joined Jindal about 5.5 years back, for a BCom honors student, I started teaching them emerging technology. The first semester, I taught them on artificial intelligence and Internet of Things, blockchain. And the question was, why am I being taught all these different technological skills? It is about the impact that these technology is going to have on business. Now, if I talk to the alumni who graduated, several years back, they say, "Oh, now I see the reason why," right? Because every aspect of our society and living is predicated on how much you know about technology. And the fact that India has launched a whole bunch of different programs to support these initiatives, it's a good thing. But for me, the other aspect of that is also, is it just happening at only certain private universities? So during my research that I've done with northeastern states and Bengaluru states, what I find, there is a wide gap in terms of what the learning process happens if they look at Rajasthan or Chhattisgarh or Assam or Meghalaya, right? The level of skilling in the digital area is very limited, right? And even if you look at Delhi University itself, I think that it is slowly catching on, and it's a reputed, world-class university, and they are just catching on in terms of how do I incorporate digital learning right through the process. It is not just about saying that I'll teach a particular programming language or thing, right? It is about integrating that with certain soft skills and critical thinking, neurodiversity, mental elasticity. Those are things that are required for problem solving, and that combined with the concepts of technology, law, business, banking, finance, and other social sciences is what is going to be the need of the hour for tomorrow. And I don't think we are there as yet. And so the question always is, how do we incorporate these digital literacy skills and integrate that as part of the curriculum, from not just at the higher education institution, but actually from the first and second grade, right? It has to happen sooner than later. Otherwise, there is going to be a big chasm between when students graduate from high school and get into higher education, and I think it'll be too late by that time. So that's something that one needs to think about in a little more longitudinal manner in terms of from the primary school level or elementary school level right up to K-12 and beyond. How do we bring that integration? And that can happen in several ways. One is obviously, like Pulkit, you said, is in terms of educate the educators, right? The teachers and the educators need to get a little more comfortable with understanding technology, understanding what does it mean to be a digital organization, what kind of transformations are happening both within the society as well as within an organization. So we can talk about all these different AI technologies that are coming into play, whether it is in the legal realm or whether it is the new way of finding cancer cure and research. And yesterday I was reading about the All-India Institute of Medical Sciences using AI. And so how does it kind of be more pervasive, right? And so one is this, we start with that, but also there has to be very specific attention paid to making sure that these are meaningful, right, in terms of how it ultimately translates into the real world. Organizations do need people who are digitally trained, and because they are going to look at their bottom line and their top line to make sure that whether it is marketing, you need a different type of digital skills. So it has to be customized. So if you are in the finance world, you need a different type of digital skills that needs to be taught. If you are a lawyer, there has to be a different type of digital skills that they need to be aware of, right? So I think that customization of digital literacy is very important, and which is not being looked at this point in time in my view. The other aspect that I really want to bring to the table is around the vocational training the adult training, continuous learning programs that are being offered, especially the ITI. There are over 15,000 industrial training institutes in India, right? The problem is that they can actually train 25 lakh people in their 15,000 ITIs that exist. But this is a report that came out last year from the Niti Aayog that talked about how poor these ITIs are, right? They looked at, they did the measurement and they said that, again, this is where the demand side comes into play. The average placement rate of trainees from Indian ITIs was less than 0.1%, right? The average rating of these Indian ITIs was 1.41 out of 5. Only 8% of the Indian ITIs qualify as per their metric, the STRIVE metric, right? And finally, which is kind of connected to the SDG part of it, only about 6.6% of the trainees and 15.8% of the instructors in the ITIs were females. So this talks about what I mentioned in my opening remarks in terms of availability, access, and the quality and the outcomes, right? I think the availability is there, access is there, but I think we are missing out on the quality part of it and the aspects relating to the outcomes. So why is that? I think that one needs to look at the demand of these skilled workers, whether from a digital standpoint, because they are not being taught, whether these are, in the future, we need people who are drone operators. We need people who are managing wastes. So the kind of work that is going to be required is going to be very different than what we are used to today. In 5 years' time, I think 51% of the jobs are going to require very different skills. And so how are we preparing them for that? And so that's a problem that needs to be fixed in a very rapid manner. And so I'll talk about the certification and accreditation later, but I just wanted to leave this as a challenge, especially from a digital standpoint, the fact that number one, you are not going to escape the lack of digital literacy in any field, right? And number two, I don't think we are producing enough digitally literate and integrated skill framework at this point in time, both in India and abroad. It's not just in India. It's not an India problem. So that's where I leave off. But I think I want to come back to the whole accreditation and how do we address that later.
Thank you, Professor Ram. I think you made a lot of interesting points, and you repeatedly emphasized some very cutting-edge digital literacy skills that people need, also about how our digital natives, the youngest lot, are literally born with access to technology. An interesting thing that I would love to hear from all of you, if time permits, is that as we are increasingly talking of things like artificial intelligence, are we also leaving behind some other very important aspects like emotional intelligence? Because you did speak of people having access to a lot of things. And you did mention very briefly things about soft skills, especially when you say that a lot of skills that one acquires today may be redundant going forward, or the jobs of the future may not necessarily depend on the skills of today. So then what really are the skills that we're looking at? Since you did close your remarks with outlining some problems and challenges, please allow me to go back to Professor Nigam to actually talk a little more about challenges. So, Professor Nigam, as a seasoned academic and administrator, what do you think as some of the pressing challenges that institutions face in redefining skill development, in redefining lifelong and experiential learning? Over to you.
Thank you, Pulkit. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you asked a question on the challenges that we are facing at the law school in terms of skills and in terms of, well, I suppose in terms of teaching and learning. But I want to connect that to the very interesting question that you raised earlier. And I'm thinking those are facets of the same question. you took off on Ram's point about the idea that the skills that we need in the future. By future, we mean the next 5 years, not the distant future. Might be very different from what we have here. And actually, I'm just, if you allow me, those are aspects I think of the same kind of response I wanted to give to the question that you asked. You asked about challenges towards the end. It's a fascinating question, because I just recently read, there was a very interesting article in the New York Times on what will AI do to professions and jobs, and the article made the point that 90% or 95% of software jobs will go in the next, because coding is not going to be an issue anymore for professional coders only. AI will transform the way people code and the way people approach software. And the thrust of that article was that the kind of skill that was needed was going to be focused on how people can communicate well. So really good communication skills, and also on great interpersonal skills, how people relate to people and how they're able to get other people to work with them and work with them well. So, and you can see, if these are the skills that are in the mandate of that article, by the way, was to say that humanities still have a role to play, and that sciences and technology, STEM is not the only thing, it's not the only game in town. That was the mandate of the New York Times article. But I think the larger point that that piece was making, it provides us with a quandary, because I'm not really sure. I don't think I have a solution for this yet, but I'm not really sure how we integrate the teaching of good communication skills and the teaching of interpersonal skills in lifelong learning. And that's important for us, because those are the skills that are in demand going into the future. How to integrate that into our curriculum, especially from a lifelong learning point of view, would be a great challenge. That's, by the way, and now coming to your question, that is the challenge that we are facing in law school. We are emphasizing the idea of good communication, by which we mean accurate, precise, concise communication that our students are able to do. Ram mentioned ITIs, and one of the things about graduates or graduating from institutions is that their substantive skills get lost in poor communication. So they're poor communicators. And it's really important, therefore, to fix that aspect of the problem. That problem is only going to be exacerbated with the advent of AI and technology in the future. So communication is an issue for us. It's an issue across domains. Law just happens to be the cutting edge of that issue. But otherwise, the lack of communication skills is written and oral is a problem for all domains. And interpersonal skills, how people relate to each other, and how you can make sure that people are able to work in teams is an exceedingly important skill that will become the most critical skill in the future. And I think it's a challenge for all of us about how to integrate that into our teaching and learning at universities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So since we are, almost in the last segment of the time allocated to our panel, I would just want to quickly dive into a question that we've received from the audience, because I understand that in this Zoom meeting room, we're not really able to directly engage with them. But I've received an audience question that I'd like to pose to all of you, and anybody could please take that up first. So one of our audience members says that lifelong learning efforts need to translate into employability too. How do we overcome the discriminatory practices such as ageism in ensuring equal opportunities? Professor Mercy, would you like to take that up first?
Yeah, I do agree with, our audience member who's, posted that question that, a couple of years ago, I would still feel that ageism was an issue. But I think by and large, most of us as, educators, as, participants in the university ecosystem, have felt, and, having worked in diverse spaces within the university, we've not felt that, there's been any juncture where we have specifically, taken a call to do, reject a candidate merely because of their age. And the second aspect which I wanted to address was, about the issue of employability. And I think that's a very disconcerting, issue. And it cuts across all, whether it's a professional course or whether it's be a degree course. In fact, interestingly, I was just hearing another EdTech platform founder a couple of days ago, and said that, they're only basically 15% of, Indian education system has only 15% or, consists of professional courses, whereas the bulk of the country, almost 80%, still studies basic undergrad degrees. So there's a question of, when we say, why are the employment rates so high in our country? It's because, we have not sufficiently made aware the youth of our country, the Gen Z, the, post-millennial generation of, what are the other kinds of opportunities, particularly in the rural, semi-rural areas of the lots of our country, that, there are other kinds of vocational courses that, if they are sufficiently skilled, there's a high likelihood of, them being employed, swiftly into the market. And, the same problem also that we face, whether it's the professional courses, whether it's engineering, it's a big, we've been hearing the stories about engineers, how Indian engineers, we have about more than 15 million engineers, the largest cohort graduating each year in our country, in the world. And yet, we still struggle, most of the engineers struggle to find jobs. In fact, they earn even less than, the other professions. So yes, employability quotient has been, a big sticking point. And I do concur with Professor NIGAM and what he just now said. Your soft skills, your interpersonal skills, your ability to, work as a team is also something that Professor Ram echoed, that your ability to, adapt to technologies. I, as an educator, every week I'm on the lookout as to what is the next new thing on the block. So if it's just ChatGPT releasing its Sora, last week, and I'm just on the lookout in another 5 days when it hits when it's available on the public platforms, what is the next thing that I need to adapt to be able to, distill to my students? Of course, on digital literacy, I would say that I learned first from my students. They are my teachers, and, they forced me to join the technology cart almost every semester. So, yeah, these are a couple of things that, we really need to ponder on, particularly in the aspect of employability. Ageism, I'm sure that, a lot of universities, don't even look at it so much. And so there may be certain aberrations that our audience member is referring to, that there may be aberrations where, somebody is not being selected on the basis of their age. Of course, one also has to bear in mind the professional courses where regulatory bodies may set their own criteria.
Thank you, Professor Mercy. Professor Nigam, Professor Ram, would you like to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I was engaged with the Skill Development Corporation of India, or something, the National Skill Development Corporation, on doing some research and few years back. And at that time, they had planned, because they had done a partnership with the private agencies to skill up about 4 crore people in the next 5 years. And they were incentivized, both the learners and the people who were engaging with them, whether they are machinists, lathe operators, welders, electricians, whatever, right? In different organizations. Question, the problem that we, consistently heard was that while they went through this different learning, upskilling activities over the 6 month or whatever, 8-9 month time period, they never found an opportunity to get absorbed in institutions. So the whole, the demand side, that magic has not been done. And that's a broader economic issue, right? In terms of, are there enough employment opportunities for these machinists and the lathe workers and others, right? And that is why I think the whole aspect of skill, what kind of skills are being propagated and being advanced, I think there needs to be some fundamental change there so that the demands of the future in terms of work can be met appropriately, because they are being taught something that is relevant from 10 years back or 20 years back, no longer relevant, right? So if I think about how this is being done, especially in the US, there are about 3,000 counties in the US, right? And there are more than 1,000 community colleges, right? And these community colleges offer courses regularly at a very minimal cost, and that could lead to a 2-year diploma, or and then they can move up places. And the courses that have been offered, and I'm looking at not just the community colleges, but also regular universities like NYU and Harvard. They have a whole, I'm talking about the 1990s, they had a whole compendium of about 300 pages of continuing education and adult education programs, right? That was meaningful at that time. Those have since been upgraded. So if we go back and look at what these institutions offer, University of Maryland or others, Thomas Edison University, they offer this continuing education with the skills that are of relevance today, right? And so I think that kind of transformational change needs to happen in the education, higher education institutions broadly, universities and vocational institutions in India, so that it becomes relevant from a demand standpoint to meet those demands, right? I think it is important to understand how those transformations can happen, but it has to be meaningful and deliberate transformational change in the education patterns and what is being taught. Cannot teach the same things about AC motors and DC motors that was taught 40, 50 years ago. And it is a different. You have to talk about IoT. What do these sensors do in terms of creating smart meters, and how do they manage the grids, right? Grid supply. That's what needs to be taught. And I don't think that kind of thought process has come into the being at this point. I think there is a lot of opportunities, tremendous amount of opportunities. And so if you think about Germany, for example, they have a two-stage process, right? It's an apprenticeship. All their education is partially experiential, partially theoretical, right? And there is a place for both of that, right? And some of the aspects of those, whether it is Germany doing that, or the UK system providing badges for their parking their credits and program. I think something of that nature needs to be thought about in a little more meaningful manner, rather than saying that, hey, once you're done, that's it, right? So I think that's an important element of how to think about it. And whether it is with age, as you learn, you have new skills, that's what is going to be valued. I don't think the fact that you are a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old is going to matter. If you have certain skills that are relevant today, industry is going to absorb you. And of course, there are legal restrictions that may be against not hiring people with genders, age, and so on and so forth. Because in the US, they do credit people with military service because they come with certain skills, right? So you are given credit for the fact that you have done something volunteering work, you have certain military work. So all those things come into being. And so we need to think about this in a little more holistic manner than simply saying that, hey, how do I, provide accreditation for something that you have, finished in a matter of 3 months or 6 months. I think that's my point.
Point taken, Professor Ram, and I've got a cue. We are really out of time. We have just about 60 seconds to go. So what I'll quickly want to do is just to sort of come back to everything that all of you shared over the last 60 minutes or so. I can't think of a better way really to, draw this one to a close than quoting the wise man, Albert Einstein, who once said that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that we used when we created them. And clearly there is a lot more thought, a lot more newer ideas, but also, of course, going back to the roots that's needed. If I could just maybe for 10 seconds each, beginning with Professor Nigam, so that we can quickly take in your concluding remarks, and then we come to an end. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just end by saying that it's really important that now universities pay as much attention to continuous and lifelong learning as they've been paying to undergraduate and postgraduate education in classrooms. It's really important that an equal amount of time is spent on both. Thank you.
Professor Mercy?
Taking off from where what Professor Nigam said, I think we also need to focus on, dissipating the structural barriers as well as design barriers and cater to, the needs of individual learners, so that we sort of support them in this process of lifelong learning.
Thank you. Over to you, Professor. Final 10 seconds.
And picking up on Professor Nigam and Professor Mercy's point, I would say I think there has to be a concerted effort from the government, the public institutions, government and private institutions to ensure that we think about transforming this whole aspect of degrees, examinations and credits and grades into something more meaningful. I think that requires a little more challenge, but I think it can be done if we put our minds to it.
Thank you very much. I will take this opportunity again to thank each one of you, Professor Nigam, Professor Mercy, Professor Ramachandran, for joining me for this interesting conversation today. I understand that we're leaving this with some answers, but a lot more questions and a lot of ideas, which I think is a good place to be in. And I hope that this conversation starts off many more, and we're also all able to draw upon each other's experiences and take them back and just maybe also from our audience engage further and see where are some lasting contributions that can be made. Thank you very much again. It was an absolute pleasure to interact with all of you.
Thank you, Professor Khanna.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you,
you
everyone.
all. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Thank you.